Hello, welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. This week, NATO defense ministers met in Brussels and endorsed a major policy shift, a proposed increase in defense spending to 5% of national GDP. The move reflects deepening concern over security threats, particularly from Russia, and a growing push for NATO to become more self-reliant in the face of evolving global challenges. Support for the plan is gaining momentum. 14 NATO countries, mainly along the eastern flank near Russia, have already endorsed the target. Germany, Europe's economic powerhouse, has also signed on. France remains cautious. President Emmanuel Macron has signaled opens to 3.5% military spending level, but stopped short of backing the full 5%. Under the proposal, 3.5% will be dedicated to hard military power, equipment, personnel and readiness, while 1.5% will support broader defense efforts, including cybersecurity, logistics and infrastructure. There is, however, no firm deadline to reach the goal. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte has floated 2032 as a possible target date, but that remains under negotiation. So the questions tonight: is this ambitious target truly achievable, or is it political theater? Could it strengthen NATO's credibility or reveal deeper divisions within the alliance? To help us answer these questions, we are joined now by Mr. Tobias Ellwood, who is a senior UK parliamentarian, is a former chair of the Defence Select Committee and a former British Army officer. He has long been a prominent voice on national security, defence policy and the need for strategic clarity in the West. So, Mr. Ellwood, warm welcome to Inside Politics. And let me start with a question. You have long been warned about the West's need to rearm and prepare for new global threats. Is it realistic to achieve 5% NATO target by 2032?
Well, good afternoon. I think you summarized it very well indeed. This is a huge challenge and a question mark for capital cities in Europe. But when you stand back and look at the world, it's getting more dangerous, not less. We're seeing America dial back from its support, its interest in Europe, and we're seeing the threats increase. Russia is not disappearing. Putin is not rowing back at all from his own threats on Ukraine. Indeed, he could even go further than that. So this is a wake-up call. This is a recognition that we've had relatively 30 years maybe of peace since the end of the Cold War, and now we're in a new era of insecurity, and we need to wake up and spend more money. So I think what Mark Rutte was trying to achieve was a warning, if you like, the start of a debate to get capital cities in Europe talking about this, speaking with the general public as well, to take everybody with them to say we've got to do more. We've got to look after our own security. NATO has got to increase defense spending.
Well, indeed, but do you believe this 5% NATO target is finally a serious response or just a symbolic gesture to appease Washington?
You're right. There is that calculation as to what President Trump was talking about. He's made it very clear he wants to see Europe spend more on defense. But when you break it down, as you did in your introduction, 5% is 3.5% on hard power, and then 1.5% is actually on supporting the armed forces, the industry, the society. There's other aspects of it. I actually believe it's easily achievable. Again, you mentioned that the closer to Russia you go, many of these countries are already meeting 3%. And Britain had a defense review come out a few days ago. We're targeted to move that way as well. So I think this is absolutely achievable. It's sadness that we have to go down this road. It's a worrying time in our history that Europe is having to consider. We're back in the 1937 again in dealing with authoritarian threats that mean us harm.
As someone with military and political experience, do you think most European governments are ready to pursue their citizens about the necessity to achieve 5% GDP?
Well, it's a good question, because you ask anybody in Britain, and they want money spent on hospitals, on schools, on local matters. But I make the case that our economy and our security are now intertwined. They're absolutely linked. And if our economy is hit because of global events, there's no money in the government pot for any government department. So it's very important that we improve our security. I say this very candidly. Every day, Britain is subject to an attack, a major cyber attack, coming from either Russia, maybe China, or non-state actors and so on. We have our cables, undersea cables, off our shores, being targeted by shadow fleets. These are dangerous times, and we need to recognize that we need to do more to protect ourselves.
Well, United Kingdom has historically positioned itself as a bridge between the United States of America and the European Union, the Europe itself, I mean. With this shift, is the UK ready to lead by example or risk being seen as falling behind its Eastern NATO partners?
You're right to mention America, because president after president since the Second World War has had a sense of duty to support our global order. And it is worrying that Donald Trump has chosen to step back from that, to be less interested in what's going on around the world, to work with allies such as Britain and so forth, other members of the United Nations, to try and keep the peace. And that has made calculations about where we go all the more difficult. I simply say it's a lot easier if Britain and America are on the same page when it comes to international security.
Mr. Ellwood, the UK often calls for increased defence spending, but at the same time it's struggling to maintain its 2% in real terms. Therefore, can Britain's credibility lead this path?
Yeah, we've got to convince the British people that defence spending needs to go up. Because, as I say, when there are cyber attacks that take place here, we haven't spent much on defence for the last 30 years. And the world, as I say, feels different. It feels more dangerous. There is a growing understanding here that we do need to spend more on defence.
Some critics argue that unless this 5% target is backed by a timeline and enforcement mechanism, it's just another NATO promise unlikely to be fulfilled. Do you agree with this statement?
I think it's very true indeed. It's why the Secretary General, Mark Rutte, said that when the nations meet, the NATO countries meet in June in The Hague, he wants to see a timetable. Every year, there's going to be an advance in defence spending. So it doesn't get kicked into the long grass or down the road or so forth, but there is an actual plan to make this work.
But why 2032? Why do you think this year was selected as a precise time or approximate time to achieve the desired result?
I personally feel that we're going to have to get there sooner. That is the scale of the threats that are coming over the hill. Global disorder is on the rise. There are more authoritarian states than there are democracies now, and these are very, very challenging times. So I think we're going to get there faster. As I say, this is part of a conversation, the start of a very serious, difficult conversation about keeping international peace and looking after European security.
So we should expect a major spending right now?
Well, it takes time to procure new planes or new ships or tanks or so forth, or even develop a cybersecurity network or space defense. But what has to happen is the government commit money so the start of that process can begin. Contracts can be looked at, procurement cycles begun. These are all the things that have to happen now.
Let's say the countries like France, Italy helped or delay to achieve the promised results. How should NATO behave in that? Should there be a specific mechanism to make sure that the countries fulfill their obligations?
Yes, this is always a difficulty with NATO. Some countries aren't even meeting today their 2% target. Spain, I think, is an example of that. But I think countries across Europe are now realizing we are in very, very different times. This is a new era of insecurity that we have to recognize and work together, added with the challenge that we could see the United States choose to step back a little from its interest in European security.
But still, we cannot exclude the fact that the economic development in between of the countries of the European Union, it's completely different if we compare the United Kingdom, the countries like Germany, France, and the Baltic states, Lithuania or Latvia. Their situation is totally different. Therefore, how the countries can express its mutual support in this important spending?
I think this is part of the individual sovereign plans. Each state will develop its own strategy as to how to move to 2032 and provide the necessary security and defense for their own country, but also their NATO commitments.
But according to the official statements made by the governments in Europe, the situation is different in eastern part of Europe, where there is a real potential for the threat to be attacked, and the situation in western part of the world, where the country is geographically far away.
Yes, absolutely right. And that reflects perhaps the sense of threat that you pick up the further east you go towards Russia. And it's reflected also in the defense budgets that you spend there. Look what Finland is spending. Poland has just jumped as well. And other countries there. The further west you go, they're feeling it less. But as Britain saw when the Ukraine was invaded and those grain ships couldn't get out of Odessa, or the ships were blocked in the Red Sea, when global economy is impacted, it affects us all. So I make that point, that relationship between international security and international prosperity.
Should they be the redefinition of the term security when it goes beyond the traditional defense like energy or independence, cyber, or even AI?
Well, you illustrate just how complex the threat picture has now become. It's no longer about military might either side of a battle zone. It now manifests itself in ways of, as I say, snipping those undersea cables, or even just denying the use of rare earth minerals, or a major cyber attack. Drones as well are a new dimension to warfare. It's made it all very, very complicated indeed, there's no doubt about it. But it does require strategy as how you're going to defend yourself, and do that from an all-of-society approach.
So as a former soldier, how confident you are that this spending surge will reach the frontline readiness rather than being swallowed by bureaucracy, consultancy fees, or procurement scandals?
Well, I hope that doesn't happen, but I just think the wider feeling that we are in very different times now will energize all countries to say, this is what we have to do. This is what is needed to keep Europe and indeed our global order working. And that will, I think, shake people up. It'll make us feel that this is a different era. We had the Cold War, the post-Cold War, and this is now a new era of insecurity.
So, and finally, if Europe fails to meet this moment, how long will the US continue to take care over the security, continent security, and what will be the consequences for the United Kingdom and the NATO as a whole?
Yeah, these are important questions for NATO. Its long-term existence, it's certainly been tested over the last few years. I would like to have seen a far greater engagement in supporting Ukraine. That didn't happen. But let's not take away from the fact that every Eastern European country does not feel safe by Russia, with President Putin wanting to advance a sense of influence in the same way that his hero Stalin did after the Second World War. And that is making everybody realize we've got to spend more on defense.
Well, Mr. Ellwood, thank you. Thank you so much for joining Inside Politics.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, and that brings us to the end of tonight's edition of Inside Politics. NATO's proposed 5% defense spending target could mark a turning point or expose the alliance's underlying tensions. With support growing on the eastern flank, hesitation in western capitals, and Washington demanding more commitment, the road ahead is anything but certain. The questions of capability, credibility and cohesion will shape not just NATO's future, but the broader security achievement of the West. We'll continue to follow the developments and debates and decisions that will determine whether this bold move becomes reality or remains just another declaration on the paper. Thanks for watching Inside Politics. Stay informed, stay critical, and stay with us. See you soon.